Welcome to the AMP Podcast. I'm here with my man, Johg Ananda.
Thank you, Aubrey.
We got a bunch of shit to talk about, dude.
Yeah.
Let's start with weed. Let's start with weed because that's actually one of the ways that I got to know you, because we were out in California where weed, that fine medicinal plant that we've all come to know and love, is legal for medicinal purposes.
Somewhat legal.
More for medicinal purposes. More legal than here in the fine
great state of Texas. Yes.
Exactly. And that was the first time I really experienced an edible, and this is Jambo Superfoods, a company that you founded. And the first time I experienced an edible that I not only liked the ingredients of what was in the edible, but I really liked how it felt. It was like a real game changer at that moment. And so we made the introduction through your product, and then after that I was like, all right, I got to meet the dude who made this thing. So, but tell us a little bit about that journey, man. Introduce yourself and how you came about producing these fine, delicious weed snacks.
Sure. So Jambo Superfoods I got to back up to when I moved to California.
Yeah.
And as you know, people know or don't know, California's had some sort of medical marijuana program for about the last 20 years. And the legality is a whole discussion we can get into. But basically, if you're living in California, you can get a doctor to recommend cannabis to you. And you have access to, the official count is unknown, but anywhere from 200 to 1,000 different dispensaries in the greater Los Angeles area.
And I did this, by the way. I went out to Cali. I spent a good amount of time there. There's this little green sign on Pacific Coast Highway, and I cruise in, and there's this clearly this mother and son, like just kind of bullshitting and talking to each other. And then the mother goes into her office, and then the son tries to act all professional. He's like, "Are you here to see the doctor?" I was like, "That's your mom, fool." like, who are you kidding here? I was like, "Yep." And then just went in there, and she asked a bunch of questions. Do you ever have trouble sleeping? I was like, "Yes." "Why, yes, I do." And then, they all kind of know the game a little bit, and they're very sympathetic to that. And marijuana has such a variety of benefits that it can help so many different conditions, like insomnia, which is what she officially put down. I got my license, and then you're wide open to a paradise cornucopia of marijuana products.
Yeah, I think that the doctors provide a really good service in screening people. Is really what they're doing, is they're looking for people where it might be contraindicated. It's not really contraindicated for almost any condition, but there could be some people that are psychotic or have some issues that maybe they shouldn't be dealing with psychedelics.
Yeah.
But
it's a good point.
If you do get the recommendation, you can go into these places, and some of them are just as the dispensaries are more sketchy than the scenario you described for the doctors. And then some of them are beautiful places where the collective has invested a huge amount of money, and they have a wonderful buffet, and they can provide a lot of education. And the products continue to improve, and I think Jambo Superfoods has been part of improving the caliber of what's available. But when I moved to California, 5 or 6 years ago, and I got into this, it was my first time I had access to, not to edibles, because I had been making edibles 15 years ago, which was actually the original recipe for Jambo Superfoods, was something I came up with way back that I brought into the present. But it was the first time I had access to something that was consistent. And that was really the magic for me, was I could get these little Jolly Rancher candies, and I'd start off, I got 1 or 2, and then I'd eventually go into this place, and I'd be like, "How many do you have?" And I'd buy 50 of them all at once. I'd buy the whole stock out, and I could bite off like a third of one, and it would get me to the same place every time.
How do you bite a Jolly Rancher? I'm calling bullshit. You can only bite a Starburst.
Well, it's not good for your teeth. and I'm going to get to this. That was part of the problem, was it wasn't a sustainable thing for my oral health or my physical health. But I had access to this consistent, low quality product.
Sure.
And I was also really starting to hone and develop my yoga, spiritual path, meditation practice. And I was combining the two, and I found that they go together really, really well, and that's something we can talk about.
For sure.
And I would, if like on a 1 to 10 scale, and 10 is you're out of your mind high, and 1 is like barely perceptible, and let's say at like a 5, you're comfortable to navigate reality in the world and interact with people. I found that, I knew how to get to a 5, but if I got to like a 7 or an 8, where I'd be uncomfortable in the kind of consensus reality. In a yoga studio, I could be, I could function at a 7 because I was being guided. I was in a safe container, and I was doing these postures and asana that seemed to just really, really complement the experience. So doing a lot of yoga, getting really high beforehand.
Which is something I generally recommend.
Yes.
It's like weed and yoga. Has that been a tradition? It's like we didn't invent that, right? They were getting high and doing yoga back in India,
yeah,
right?
absolutely. So Shiva is depicted with cannabis a lot.
Right.
And the bong, which is basically a cannabis lassi, is kind of like what.
So bong, not like the bong you smoke out of.
BHANG.
Okay.
So some people pronounce it bang. Mm-hmm. There's actually a company that makes edibles that are
called Bang. Yeah,
nice, called Bang. Yeah. And so the Bang was a cannabis lassi, which
and a lassi's like a yogurt smoothie.
Yogurt smoothie. Yep. Mango lassies are what most Americans probably are familiar with.
Good for digestion.
Good for digestion, and actually really good for cannabis because the THC molecule really likes to bind onto any kind of lipid or fat. So when you blend it in with some kind of dairy, that's going to make it more bioavailable, and you're going to have a better experience than if you just ate it. So yes, long traditional use, and I think that actually more of a use than our culture wants to recognize. For some reason, we've kind of scrubbed out that part of the history of cannabis. I mean, in part of the propaganda wars, they've just totally gotten rid of it. And then I think the other half of it is that the modern religions too have excised psychedelic use as part of their ceremonies over the last 500 to 1,000 years. So I'm rediscovering what all the spiritual traditions have known for thousands of years, is that psychedelics, which cannabis is a very mild and comfortable psychedelic.
It can be a very mild and comfortable psychedelic. You take too much, it is no longer mild or comfortable.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But yes, generally speaking.
Yeah, well, if you take a responsible amount. I mean,
Yeah.
the same could be said with alcohol. If
Sure.
you have a couple beers, it's like a great social afternoon. And it'd be like, but if you drink a liter of vodka,
No doubt.
yeah, all of a sudden you're into that like
hairy.
unmanageable zone. So one day I was at Peace Yoga in downtown Los Angeles, and there's this really crazy but wonderful woman, Sherry Ray, who teaches there. She's been teaching for like 20 years. And on Wednesday and Friday nights, she does like 3-hour plus kick your ass hatha yoga sessions. And I love hatha yoga. It's actually not my main focus now, but what was really magical about this is that she do these long hatha sessions, and I look at hatha, I incorporate it into my practice now because I look at hatha as kind of like you kind of beat up the ego to the point where it settles down, kind of like there's a guard dog and you throw it a piece of steak and all of a sudden it is occupied with something else and you can kind of slip past it and you can go deeper. So she would do these really long yoga classes, but what the magic of this was, and what I learned, is that the way her studio is set up is that you practice in the basement, and it's like a cave down there, and then up above she's got a cafe. So the last yoga class of the night, she does this yoga, and then she goes upstairs, and everybody goes upstairs, and she makes this incredible food for everyone, and everybody hangs out, and she holds court, and she loves it, and she's really good at it, and she'll be entertaining people for hours. It's like her place. But that allowed me to just go deep. And I had this one shavasana, relaxation at the end of the session where I must have laid there for a couple hours. And I started doing what I refer to as like a systems check. And I was kind of just auditing my life. And you'll find that a lot of the psychedelics, I know you've talked about it.
Sure.
They do this, they bring your stuff up and they make you confront it. And it made me just start kind of questioning what I was doing. And I was thinking about, man, like I'm really high right now. And then I'm thinking I'm like getting really high every day. And then I was thinking, am I like a drug addict? You know what I'm saying? This is your brain on drugs. I've seen the egg frying. And I'm like, is this bad for me? And then I thought, well, you're in a yoga studio. You just did 3 hours of yoga and you're meditating about how to improve your life. So I didn't feel like it was really like that bad of a thing. It was actually helping me. I had started my first business, it was going really well, and I'm taking care of myself. And so I thought, okay, well, that's actually pretty good. That's working for me. Maybe the cultural narrative about this being bad for me doesn't add up. But the first business is a health food subscription box, healthysurprise.com. And I'm the CEO of this international health food company, and I'm biting into these, high fructose corn syrup, sugary candies every day. And I'm thinking that there's like a conflict dissonance in terms of my role in the business, and that the main value proposition of that company is we discriminate based off of the ingredients of the snacks.
Sure.
And here I am with this really lousy, I don't know what it was made of, but it couldn't have been good. And and then it's not good for my teeth, and it's just not good for me.
Yeah, it'd be like if I was out smoking cigarettes and drinking Cokes.
Yeah, and then you come in and you get on.
What the fuck, Aubrey? What are you doing?
So that didn't really jive, and that was kind of like one of these. The phrase "comes to Jesus" moment comes up. I mean, I don't know that I came to Jesus, but I came and met myself, and I was kind of like, this has got to change. So that was on a Wednesday, and then the next day on a Thursday, I went to a couple different dispensaries. And I went to talk to the owners of the bud tenders, and I said, "Hey, do you guys have any healthy edibles?" And they're like, "Oh yeah, sure. Hold on, let me go get you. I got this vegan brownie." And they come over and they give me their vegan brownie. And I'm sure most of your listeners would know that vegan is more of a philosophical decision than a healthful decision.
Sure.
Vegan food tends to be more healthful because it excludes a lot of bad things, but Coca-Cola and Krispy Kreme can be vegan too. So it doesn't necessarily mean it can be a lot of sugar. And so that really wasn't what I was looking for. So I was driving home from one of these dispensaries, and I flashed back to this recipe that I had made like 10 years ago back at this point when I was back in Florida. Because in Florida, you got to be discreet on the down low with your weed, because even today, when I go home and I tell people that I'm running a cannabis company, the voices get a little low, and they look over their shoulders, and it's, the paranoia and the propaganda is still strong in a lot of places. So then I'm thinking, well, like, man, I could do this. I could make my own healthy edibles. And then I thought, okay, now you're just being a crazy stoner that is going to start making pot brownies for the world. But then I thought, well, actually, I've got domain experience here. I'm running an international health food company. We were working with over 200 brands at the time. So while we had never actually made like the end product, we really just handled third-party products. Mm-hmm. I knew what good products sold. I knew what packaging was. I knew the industry for consumer packaged goods that were food. So then I thought, well, maybe I'm not so crazy. And I knew that, and this was 3 years ago, and even when I kind of did all this, everyone thought I was a lunatic back then. Now everyone thinks I'm a genius because the cannabis thing has turned. But back then it was a different world. And I thought, can I do this? And I said, well, let me see if I can dig up that recipe. So I went home. I went and I found it. I used Evernote back in the day, and it was still there. Thank you, Evernote. And I went on Amazon. I overnighted like an impulse sealer. I got some polyethylene tubing from Uline, and I got all this stuff. And from having the kind of the download on Wednesday night, on Sunday night of that same week, I had like a finished product. It was a Jambo bar. Now we don't make bars, but it was a Jambo bar that I had 12 of them in a case pack, and I went to a dispensary. It was my fastest manifestation from like idea to product.
What an exciting time that is, because I've been involved in these times of hyper productivity where you're just, you have something and then you just get to work creating it. And I think, if I could just jump in for a second there in that process, when you have those times, it's often good not to talk about it with too many people. Just like keep moving forward, because you'd be surprised how that energy disperses when you start mentioning it to people. If you would have talked to too many people who are like, that's a stupid idea, dude, you're going to get thrown in jail or blah, blah, blah. You get all of these other voices in your head that will start to challenge this kind of creativity that you have, and you'll lose momentum. So for anybody who has that kind of moment, just do exactly that. Just go all the way, go for it. And of course, you want to open yourself up to feedback and whatnot. But at that time, just put it all in there.
Yeah. So, I mentor a lot of entrepreneurs, and I see a trap where people, I liken it to like jumping in the pool, and everybody tells me how they're going to dive in the pool and they're going to swim and they're going to be the best ever. But a lot of people don't jump. Because it's really fun to go tell everyone how you're going to jump in and you're going to swim and it's going to be great and you're going to be the CEO of this company. But once you jump in, you can drown. and that's not fun.
No.
So a lot of people like to walk around and talk about their idea. So and that can be tempting. I knew a girl who she came out with this idea for these condoms, and they were gonna like give a condom to someone in Africa or something.
Keep it.
And
Condoms. Just kidding. Condoms are great.
Yeah, we officially endorse condom use most of the time.
Yes, officially.
Yes.
Indeed.
So, but then, I'd see her at these events, and she's talking about how she was going to launch these things, and she had a prototype, and the marketing materials were incredible. But like a year later, I saw her, and she was still talking about how she was going to do this thing, and I realized like she was like professionally about to launch.
Did you tell her quit fucking around?
I was like, let's try one of these things out. Let's see if you got the goods, baby.
Let's test it.
Let's
Market
see if it
research.
Works. You know, I mean, come on.
Maybe she
I'll
was
help you
just in
launch
an
it.
extended market research.
Yeah. But the idea to execution is to not have this extended market research. And so I would.
But what if there's stiff competition? Okay, we should continue.
Yeah.
Enough of that.
That was great. So I find it helpful to not tell no one. Maybe tell some like an accountability partner. So I told my college roommate at the time that I was going to do this, and I remember on Sunday that I was done because I snapped a photograph of it and sent it to him, and I was like, look what I did. I had this idea and I executed on it in like 4 or 5 days. So but yeah, more action, less talk.
Yeah.
So that was kind of the initial thing. So I made this package. And so I made a couple cases of them, and then I went to the fanciest dispensary collective that I could think of in Los Angeles, formerly called GGR. I think it's now GSR or whatever, but it's like the one closest to Santa Monica because Santa Monica doesn't allow them. And I walked in, and I had brought my case, and I had an order form, and I was like, "Who's in charge?" And I just found the person, and I got a meeting with them on the spot, and I sold her one case of Jambo bars, and it was like the first one, and it wasn't like a huge order or anything, but
Proof of concept.
it proved that someone would buy it, and it was like the most fancy place I could go to, and I wasn't expecting to get it because a good salesperson, it depends on the industry, but 20-30% of the time, if you have a funnel, they'll go from a prospect to closing the deal. So the fact that I got the first one, and this is also a different environment, the market for natural, healthy, organic products is growing every single day. But even 2 or 3 years ago, it was, it was smaller. So that kind of validated the concept. And the concept made sense to me. I know how incredible and beneficial of a plant this is, and I knew from my other business, Healthy Surprise, that there was a market for these type of things. But still, to the aspiring entrepreneurs, I see so many times people get caught up on, again, with failure to launch. What color, what shade of blue should the logo be? Or they come up with all these different things. Mm-hmm. And the main advice I have is see if there's someone that will give you $1 for your product. Is there a market? Because a lot of times you can find friends and family that will biasedly tell you how great it is, and they don't want to tell you no, and they'll buy it. But really, can you walk into a third party cold situation and find someone that will buy your product and validate that you have a widget that people want? So once we did that, then that's when I kind of got scared, because I was like, okay, I got this idea and I sold it at a price that I knew we could make a business out of it and scale it. And I knew the next step was to make a lot of product, to go be able to sell it and have some inventory.
Yeah, and that's where the legal concerns come in.
Yeah, so that was like, all I knew that I could get cashews and honey, no problem. And I didn't really know where I was going to get a bunch of cannabis. And the only thing I knew about getting a bunch of cannabis was that people that got a bunch of cannabis, can go to jail for a long time.
Yeah.
That was kind of like what I knew. I was in California, and I knew there was places all over, so somehow people were doing it. But, the propaganda had been in me, and it's still, to this day, it's a Schedule I substance. So it was kind of like, what am I doing here? How do I do this? And then that's why I like to think that 2014, it was more of a hobby than a business. It was really just taking the temperature what does this market look like? Can this be done? How can it be done? And it was a lot of just kind of learning and figuring out what the whole industry was like. And in that regard, not much has changed. Jambo Superfoods is one of a handful of brands. There's probably like 5 to 10 that are known in California to be a real player. We're in like 100 places and people know about us and there's a following and everything. And when you're in that position, it feels like we're going through a jungle with a machete. And there's no mentors. There's no one who's really come before us.
Yeah, you guys are the pioneers.
Yeah, we're figuring out. The rules aren't clear. The laws are contradictory. So
if I could just jump ahead and catch people up, because there's a lot of other stuff I want to chat with you about. So you extended the line from the bars to these bites, and you have different strengths. And I think one of the cool things is the hybrid blend of indica sativa that you use for the strain that you chose. I think you showed it to me at one point, but we don't need to disclose that for competitors.
You're in California.
Yeah, and so it's just a really cool blend. It's a really cool product. And then you went even from the bites, which you still sell, to the spray, which is also really, really cool, because then it's a very metered dose. You know exactly what you're taking. You don't have to chew anything. I felt like sometimes maybe the raisins would, because I eat a very small amount. So if I got a raisin, I might have been less or more high than if I didn't get a raisin. Like the raisin quotient was like a factor. But with the spray, I know exactly what I'm getting. And then from the THC products, you also have your whole CBD line, which is what we have for those of you watching on the camera here.
Yep.
This amazing CBD, MCT, and grass-fed ghee combination that's super epic. And so you just have a bunch of cool stuff. Plus, you also have your non-psychedelic, non-Jambo company called The Dirt, which is making the On It lip balm and making some On It toothpaste. It's about to come out. So you got your hands in a lot of entrepreneurial pies, but clearly I think Jambo is one of the most exciting for people to hear about, because this is a frontier that a lot of smart individuals realize is going to be massive. All you have to do is look at what's been happening in Colorado and Washington to see what the future holds. I mean, this is a multi-billion-dollar business, and it's too late to turn back now. It really is what I believe. We're on a path to full legalization. Yeah. It's just a matter of when.
I think about it as we've won the war. Like the drug war has been won by the pro-freedom, anti prohibition people.
And science. I mean, just the studies coming out on the benefits of CBD and the benefits of THC.
We're so blessed that cannabis cures cancer and helps children with seizures. I mean, imagine if it didn't have all those things.
Yeah.
It still should be legal.
But
The fact that it's the war on drugs has also been facilitating or been against the war on cancer for all these years is pretty wild.
Yeah, no doubt. So how does that future look? Where you see, and I think really that's what part of what you're planning is. You're just planning to basically be one of the players. So when that dial turns back and the nation open wise, I mean, do you imagine a future where you have direct to consumer sales of your THC products, just like you would a lip balm or a bag of chips or something like that, where you can just ship it out anywhere in the country and
anywhere in the world.
Anywhere in the world.
Yeah. So I look at us really as a global brand. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's a global opportunity, and we'll get there state by state. We're working and finessing through the rules to bring our brand to other states, and sometimes it feels like it's going slow, and I know there's going to be people listening to this in places where it sounds crazy that you could just walk into a store and have access to a bunch of cannabis. But when you zoom out and you look at other civil rights issues, which this is really is a civil rights, social justice kind of struggle, like gay marriage or the end of slavery or women's suffrage, these things took decades and a long time to really turn. And I saw analysis once that showed almost with all of these different civil rights issues, if you charted from when you had basically no acceptance to the number of states that accepted it, once you got up to 35 states, that's when the Supreme Court comes in and flips the switch and it goes everywhere. Mm-hmm. And we're almost hitting that magical threshold with cannabis. And I'm thinking that logic will kind of continue through?
Absolutely, it should. And for those people who are questioning whether this is a civil rights issue, I think it's at the core of civil rights. It's the sovereignty of our own consciousness and deciding that the government doesn't have a right to throw us in cages, because of what we want to do with our own consciousness. If we can't control our own consciousness, what do we control? I mean, that's like one of the basic sovereign rights of every human being, is to be able to control their own consciousness. And the audacity to say that, the government should be able to control that is just wild. I really think we'll look back at this as we look back at these other, abominations that we've had, as you mentioned, women's suffrage, slavery, these things. Like, how the hell were we justifying that? Throwing people in cages for their own good because they wanted to alter their own consciousness?
And ruining any student loans they have, or their ability to get a job because they don't have a felony record. Like, I mean, one example is in Los Angeles recently, the city attorney shut down the largest delivery service, Speedweed.com. They had like 100 drivers, and they are saying that this is going to make the community safer. But it's really hard to understand that, because if you were really interested in having a safe model, the delivery model, there's no burglaries, there's no robberies, there's no gangs involved. I mean, it's out of sight, it's out of mind, and these guys were very sophisticated. And so when you destroy that, you recreate the black market, and I think that's where a lot of the problems are. So some of it doesn't really make sense when you think about it. I mean, I don't think any of it really makes sense.
So many things don't make sense, but you watch a movie like that, a Michael Moore's movie, Who to Invade Next, and he goes to Portugal, where they decriminalized all drugs, and you see the effect that's had. Oh man, if you decriminalize all drugs, drug rates are going to go through the roof. Wrong. They go down. It's like you look at the actual data, and we have these ideas that precipitate the data. Oh, weed is a drug. We got to make it illegal. It's just an idea. It has no basis in fact. It has no basis. If you look at the actual traffic accidents and incidents in Colorado, everything that they were worried about is opposite. Yeah. Everything's safer. Everything is better. There's more money. Everything is working smoother. And the data will ultimately win. Truth will ultimately win, especially now that we have the internet. And I think that's the difference between now and so long ago, is I think there's an acceleration where bad ideas have a shorter lifespan than they used to. Like, now bad ideas get weeded out much, much quicker because this data spreads immediately. It's not like someone in New York's going to be like, you hear about what's been happening? I heard this thing. No, you don't hear that thing. You find out that thing. Yeah. Those facts, they spread immediately. And so that's what gives me optimism about the future, because we're living in a crazy, insane time now where we know the truth, but yet we have laws that oppose that truth. And it's this weird juxtaposition and transition point that I think in history we'll look back and be like, wow, that was a weird time. Cool time, but it was weird.
Well, and I think the merits of the prohibition don't jive with our federalist constitutional system. I mean, I don't think you can make an argument that someone that just is possessing a flower can be put in a cage. But even if you said, okay, well, the possession of the flower is bad, I think about it now as as I manage a bigger team, and when I've got like conflicts between employees, or there's something happens, my first thought isn't like, oh, let me go take Bobby and throw him in a cage. You know what I mean? Like that,
yeah.
That just doesn't seem to be like the appropriate way to remediate a problem. So the fact that is like, they're saying there's all these harms, which we disagree with. I don't think there's any harms really. In fact, all these benefits to curing the cancer and all these things. But then even the way that they want to solve the harms doesn't make any sense either.
No, if it was really about it, it's not about that though. And you look at some of these documentaries that are exposing how this potentially was very much social engineering to target low income and African American individuals. Like, that's where a lot of this came from, and that makes a lot of sense, because if you really wanted to do it for its own good, we'd be locking up everybody who's overweight. Every obese person gets thrown in a cage and forced on a diet.
They're hurting themselves a lot more than someone smoking.
No doubt. I mean, you look at the risk factors, the number one cause of death for those individuals, it's that they're obese, they're overweight. So you would put them in fat concentration camps if that was really the idea that we had. Now, obviously, that's an Orwellian, dystopian, incredibly fucked up model, but if that logic actually applied, and we're just doing it for your own good, then every fat person is in fat concentration camp. but obviously it's not. So there's some shady bullshit shenanigans behind it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to Nixon, and you had the counter-revolution, the free love, the 60s, and they wanted to use the powers of the state against these people, but they were just assembling and having free speech, and they couldn't use the fire hoses and the dogs and the cages against them. So they said, well, if we look at this cohort of people, what do they all have in common? Oh, they tend to have these different flowers and LSD in their pockets and in their possession. So if we can criminalize that will allow us to basically exert state control against them. And I think you also have all the racial elements of it. It's really gross. It doesn't stand up to thought and analysis, and the internet luckily gives us a way for people to kind of get that, and we know they're not just getting the message of ABC and CBS News and the official story. So yeah, it's all changing, and we're seeing that happen, and so it's exciting. Like I said, we've won it, but the battles are still going on, and some people are still being hurt. And what's going to be also interesting is what's happening to all these poor folks that are already in jail. Yep. Once this whole thing happens, I mean, that's going to be crazy. There's people with life sentences for having a couple of joints. And then one other thing I thought about when you're talking about that is if you go to the DEA's website and you go, and I've done this, and look and see why are they so against it? Almost all of the harms that they associate with cannabis or marijuana are related to the smoking of it. If you ingest it, like with Jambo Superfoods, in the edible fashion, there's no toxicity. There's no lung damage. There's really no cancer risk, and actually it has anti-tumor properties. So the arguments kind of fall apart. So we've got all the facts on our side.
Yeah, but if you eat too much, you may think you're going to die. that's for sure. You hear those classic 911 calls, and that's funny because people know me as a psychedelic kind of adventurer. I go explore these different psychedelics and have found many of them to be extremely valuable for me. But I hear this commonly. I go, man, I couldn't do any of the psychedelics like you've been doing, like ayahuasca, because this one time I ate too much weed and it was nightmarish. So I was like, yeah, I still eat too much weed, and it's the hardest thing that I've ever had to go through. Like, it's no joke when you push that threshold to 10 or 11, of what you're capable of managing. It's a rough road. I mean, it'll bring up a lot of shit, and those feelings of paranoia and your heart thumping in your chest and all these things, there's no actual toxicity, but psychologically it can be extremely challenging. So don't think that if you've eaten too much weed and freaked out that you're weak or not up to the psychedelic experience. It's challenging for everybody. It doesn't matter how many times you've done iboga or ayahuasca. You have too much weed and you're in for it. Better do some yoga. Better start breathing.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's actually a big part of what Jambo Superfoods' mission is to kind of address the harm issue. So you mentioned our potion, the spray bottle. We developed that because, I tell people eat an eighth of one of our little honey buns, and I don't want to say nobody eats the eighth, but a lot of people are like, oh yeah, whatever, I got this. And they'll eat a quarter, they'll eat a half, and they'll eat the whole thing. And then you get into this situation. And, it's easy to blame the plant for that problem, but I think about it more in terms of like a motorcycle. So if you put someone on a motorcycle and you could limit their speed to like 5 miles an hour, it's really hard for people to hurt themselves. But a lot of people get on and they're just like, how fast can this fucker go? Mm-hmm. And they go really fast, and then they wipe out and they have a really bad experience. And I think that we can use that analogy of licensing or teaching someone how to drive or having kind of rules of the road and apply that to the lack of shamanism that we have nowadays. Because what I think is happening when people take these big doses of psychedelics is that the psychedelics allow/force you to go and have this big internal, they allow you to go deep. And I think they allow you to go into the revelatory state and into kind of like a divine space. But as we talked about earlier, the ego is the gatekeeper. And the ego, if you've got a lot of trauma in your life, and we all do, it's like you have to deal with that first before it lets you pass and lets you go deep. So when people are taking these massive doses, it's basically the psychedelics are pushing them up. It's trying to like push them down into this really magical divine space, but their ego gets in the way and is like, you got to deal with all this shit right now before you go. And that's a real scary thing. And that's where I think that the yoga and the meditation and a lot of the stuff we're doing on the cultural side of Jambo Superfoods, aside from just products, is really developing ceremony and behaviors for people to help them work through this stuff and process that kind of work and go slow. I mean, it's not about you're a pussy or you're weak or you're a lightweight because you take a small dose. I mean, you're responsible and you're thoughtful and you're doing it right. And, baby steps. I mean, I think people should do really deep, long meditations and get comfortable with just sitting with yourself for a while. Then add a really light bit of cannabis and get comfortable with that. And then maybe add some more. And then maybe progress to some mushrooms or go to, and work your way to the more powerful psychedelics. But I mean, this is part of the reason I started this company. Aside from you and me and, Joe Rogan and some other people, that message is not really getting out. Mm-hmm. The cultural narrative is, you smoke a joint and you watch Half-Baked and you eat some Doritos, and that's what you do when you get high on weed. And there really isn't anyone out there holding the standard of this is a powerful medicine. It can be used. Look, I don't want to take away, go watch your stoner movie and get high and have a wonderful meal. And I do that and it's great. But there's also this other part, the spiritual part, that our cultural kind of trivializes spirituality. It's scrubbed it out. There's no temples being built nowadays. And that's not being addressed or talked about at all. So I think that's a big portion of it. And we have a job to do to basically get that out there and recalibrate the culture so people can understand how to use these things responsibly.
Yeah. No, I think that makes a lot of sense. So one of the methods that you like to do is you talked about the more yang type of yoga, the more vigorous yoga that you used to do, but you've transitioned more now into Kundalini yoga.
Yeah, Raja yoga.
Yeah.
Kundalini.
So, and that's very breath focused. Now I have a lot of experience with different types of breath, but very little experience with Kundalini. So just kind of go into that, go into the synergy there and basically how you see that fitting into someone's spiritual practice.
Sure. So Kundalini yoga, well, Kundalini is the concept of the internal energy that's within all of us, and the metaphor is that it's at the base of the spine, and it's symbolically usually referred to as like a coiled serpent that's down there, latent in anyone. And what's really magical about yoga, but Kundalini yoga specifically, is that you can go through a practice and in 20 minutes to an hour, you can uncoil that snake and you can have an incredible experience where your whole body is energized, and you might find yourself in a revelatory state where you get downloads or realizations. And what's interesting about that is that it's always there. You don't need King Arthur's sword. You have to pull out of the stone, or you don't need a special car or a factory. It's available to everybody, and all they have to really do is just sit and breathe and do some asana or movements. So Kundalini, where Hatha is what typically people think about in America as yoga, and it's really been Americanized as like aggressive stretching, Warrior 1 and Warrior 2.
Even Bikram.
Yeah, Bikram. That's what people kind of think about it. That's really not what yoga it means. Yoga, the translation is union, and it's the union of the individual self with the universal self. So bringing yourself to merge into God, basically, or the Godhead, or Brahman, or heaven, Satori, whatever word you want to use. I know that can be a charged word. Mm-hmm. So Kundalini is a combination. The term they use is a kriya, and that's kind of like the composition of the different movements that you'll do in a sequence. So the sequence is called the kriya, and it's a combination. And I'm speaking generally because it's hard to say it's just this one thing, but typically it's a rhythmic movement tied to a rhythmic breath. So, one that's very simple and powerful would be if someone found themselves in a comfortable seated position, like easy pose. They put their arms on their knees. They sat up straight.
Let's do it right now.
Do it right now?
For like 20 seconds.
Okay, sure. So come into easy pose. Put your arms on your knees. And as you inhale, draw your heart forward. And keep your head fixed in the same place and the base of your spine in the same place too. So you want to think about your spine as kind of like a string that's fixed between two places, almost like a bow. And on the inhale, you'll pull the heart forward as far as you can. On the exhale, you'll push the spine back, draw the navel into your spine.
In through the nose, out through the nose, right?
Yep. Inhaling as you come forward, feeling the belly first and then the chest. Exhaling as you draw the navel into the spine. And you'll start off slow, and as you get more comfortable, you can slowly increase the speed and the energy level that you bring into the practice. And you might find that your back starts to crack and you get a little more comfortable. And what's really good about this practice is that, if you find yourself where you've maybe taken a little bit too much cannabis or the psychedelic of your choice, this type of behavior, it brings the mind into a space where it gets into a rhythm. And instead of panicking about what to do and all the things that are coming in, you can just kind of lock into this rhythm. And it can really help in that situation where you maybe had a little bit too much. And I find that is a really good way to kind of ground people. But if you can do that type of exercise, and that's a great, powerful, easy one to do, and you do that for just 2 or 3 minutes, which when you're doing it seems like a long time, but in like real life, it's not very long. You'll find that the ego settles down.
And it's not just for when you're too high. I mean, imagine if you're feeling that charged pang of jealousy because your lover is doing something that's bothering you, or your ego gets threatened by somebody at work, or any of these things that trigger us and get us in this heightened emotional state, or we get in this state of despondency and self-pity and depression, all of these things that all of us, myself included, no matter how much work we do, we still find ourselves in. If you maybe you can't just twist your mind to get out of it, but you can tell your body and your breath to do that practice. And then by doing that practice, it's like jumping on a little lily pad that'll help you get across the stream to the other side. Maybe you can't teleport there, but you can do this breath, and then that breath will help you cross the stream back to a more reasonable consciousness where you can manage these things. So I think it's an incredibly valuable tool, and then you can obviously progress that further, into a variety of different states, and different people have done it different ways. Wim Hof has done it for, withstanding the cold and accomplishing these amazing feats, 8 Guinness World Records, manipulating his autonomic nervous system, all of these things. And then you go another way, and it's shamanic breathing, and you can reach psychedelic visionary states where I've been visited by my deceased grandmother and seen my eternal soul, and these crazy visions that you would expect on ayahuasca but have just come from breath. But, probably the longest tradition is the yogic tradition of breathing. That's been around the longest, and it's that combination of rhythmic movements with the breath. So it's just one of the pantheon of ways that you can use this innate tool that, as you mentioned, is absolutely 100% free. And no matter what the government does, they can't outlaw breathing. So you have that always available to you, no matter what.
So I have some guided Kriyas meditations at jambosuperfoods.com/intentional high. And that's available to everybody. It's free. I recommend if you go practice there. And let me just get one little last note on Kundalini. So I find that meditation, everybody's going a million miles an hour. They've got text messages and emails and all these things. And very rarely do people it's like if you're redlining your car all day and you never just let the car cool down. People don't ever take time to just sit and just let their brain process. And a lot of times the stuff that comes up is uncomfortable for them, but the brain needs to just express those things. And that's what a lot of meditation and kind of hatha yoga does. Where Kundalini gets more advanced, and it's a more advanced practice, is that, to me, once you really go deep in it, you gain the ability to call in resistance, the blarg, writer's block. We have different names for this thing, but it's like you have it on your cell phone on speed dial, and you can go into a kriya that is incredibly uncomfortable to do. You might be holding your arms for 7 minutes, and it's a simple thing to just hold your arms up and breathe, but after minute 3, everything in your body is telling you to put your arms down. And it allows you to create a situation where you come face to face with the resistance on your terms, and you're challenging it, and everything's telling you to stop, and then you push through. And so in that way, I see Kundalini as a repeatable practice to develop discipline, to develop willpower. Because if you can chant Ekankars for 7 minutes with your arms up, when someone cuts you off on the street, it's just a trivial thing. I mean, compared to the other challenge that you've done. So every morning, I try to start with that practice if I have the time to do it. It makes everything else, it's why people seem more zen, because, all these other little things that people get so worried about, once you put yourself through the ringer on your own terms repeatedly over a long time, those things become much more manageable and in a better perspective.
No doubt. Wise words, my friend. Johg, it's been a pleasure to have you on here, brother.
Thank you. This was wonderful.
You've dropped it a few times, but JamboSuperfoods.com. Anywhere that people can follow you personally if they want to keep up? Do you have like a personal Twitter or anything like that?
JogAnanda.com, and on Instagram.
JOHG.
JOHG Ananda, Divine Bliss, and at Johg Ananda on Twitter.
Beautiful, man. It's been a pleasure, my friend. Glad to have you out here in Austin. All right. Thanks, everybody. Talk to you again soon. Peace.